How does a show made with construction paper, starring 4 foul-mouthed kids, survive for over 25 years, get banned in multiple countries, declare war on Hollywood's biggest religion, and become a billion-dollar empire that changed television forever? Most shows that pull these stunts die after one season, but South Park is different, and the secret to its survival is way more shocking than you think. Let's be real. A show this raw, this offensive, this relentless, it should have been canceled after one season. Instead, it's become an unstoppable cultural juggernaut that's lasted for decades. The question isn't just how they got away with it, but why it continues to dominate the conversation. This is a show animated to look like construction paper cutouts you made in kindergarten. It's intentionally cheap, almost a dare to take it seriously. And yet, its ideas shaped an entire generation's sense of humor. The look is a joke, but its cultural footprint is monstrous. They've taken on literally everything. They went after Scientology so hard, they allegedly got spied on. They put Tom Cruise in a metaphorical closet and refused to back down when the network caved. This wasn't just an episode, it was a declaration of war. They've battled censorship networks, angered entire countries, and had an episode banned for depicting the Prophet Muhammad. Any other show would be axed. For South Park, it's just fuel for the next fire. And the celebrities! They've started feuds with almost every famous person imaginable, from Barbra Streisand to Kanye West. Nobody is safe. They don't just mock people, they create entire legends around them that stick forever. Think of all the other edgy adult cartoons that crashed and burned. They copied the shock value, but completely missed the secret ingredient. South Park didn't just survive, it built a throne on the graves of its competition. So what is their secret? It's not just about being offensive. There's a brilliant, calculated formula at play. A method to the madness that we're going to break down to reveal how they became untouchable. To understand this empire, we have to go back to the beginning. Before the fame, before the network, before anyone knew their names. It all started with 2 film students and a grainy VHS tape that was never supposed to see the light of day. So, how did this television revolution even start? It wasn't in a fancy Hollywood studio. It began with 2 film students at the University of Colorado who just wanted to make their friends laugh. Trey Parker was the obsessive director and musical genius. Matt Stone was the pragmatic math major who became his producer. They were the perfect odd couple, bonded by a shared, twisted sense of humor. Before South Park, they made a feature film called Cannibal, the Musical. It was bloody, ridiculous, and completely homemade. This DIY spirit would define their entire career. For a student film class, they threw together a short using only construction paper, glue, and an old camera. They had no idea this crude little project contained the DNA for a global phenomenon. The short was called Jesus vs. Frosty. The kids build a snowman, it comes to life, and then it tries to kill them. Their savior? A version of Santa Claus who is secretly Jesus Christ. It was a small hit at their school's film festival, a weird little curiosity. It was never meant to be seen by the outside world. To them, the joke was already over, but someone saw it. A young Fox executive named Brian Graden got a copy from a friend and thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. He saw the potential nobody else did. Graden tracked them down and offered them $2,000 to make another short. The catch? He wanted to send it to his industry friends as a video Christmas card. This was their first professional gig. They couldn't believe their luck. They took the money and essentially remade the first short, but this time with a slightly bigger budget and a much more focused story. This was their shot. The result was The Spirit of Christmas, later known as Jesus vs. Santa. This time, the 2 religious icons get into a bloody kung fu battle over the true meaning of Christmas. The kids have to stop them. Remember, this is before YouTube, before the internet was in every home. Graden sent his Christmas card out on dozens of VHS tapes. It was the beginning of one of the first true viral videos. People would get the tape, duplicate it, and give it to their friends. Those friends would duplicate it again. It spread through Hollywood like a secret password, an underground cult classic in the making. Legends like George Clooney were personally making copies for their friends. Having a copy of this tape was a status symbol. It proved you were in on the joke before anyone else. The appeal was simple. It felt like something you weren't supposed to be watching. It was raw, offensive, and completely unfiltered. It was the ultimate piece of forbidden media. This grassroots buzz was totally unprecedented. Trey and Matt now had a hit property on their hands, and they hadn't even signed a network deal yet. The power was finally in their hands. Armed with this incredible buzz, they started pitching South Park as a full series. The first and most obvious stop was Fox, the network where Brian Graden worked. And Fox immediately said, no. They were terrified. The content was just too much. They couldn't have a talking piece of poo on their network. They wanted to water it down, but Trey and Matt refused. MTV passed. Everyone passed. The industry had a bizarre problem. They all personally loved the short, but were convinced that putting it on air would be professional suicide. Then came Comedy Central. At the time, they were a tiny, failing network. They were desperate for anything that would get people talking. They had literally nothing to lose. Network president Doug Herzog saw the tape and instantly got it. He knew that this was the kind of dangerous, exciting comedy that could put his network on the map. He was willing to take the risk. They greenlit a pilot. Against all odds and after every other major player had rejected them, South Park finally had a home. But the fight was far from over. They produced the pilot episode, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. The network, following standard procedure, prepared to show it to test audiences to gauge the public's reaction. The results were an absolute disaster. They were some of the lowest scores the testing company had ever recorded. Audiences, especially women, actively hated what they saw. The data screamed, cancel it. Any other network would have killed it right there. But Herzog and his team ignored the data and trusted their gut. They doubled down, believing in the four boys at the center of this chaos, setting the stage for a pop culture bomb to go off. This simple, paper-cutout world was built on 4 pillars. These weren't just characters. They were archetypes that every kid recognized from their own schoolyard. It was a formula so perfect, it felt instantly familiar. First, you have Stan Marsh, the all-American everyman. He was our way into this insane world. When things got too weird, Stan was the one to ground it, usually with a puke or a simple, exasperated, dude, this is pretty messed up right here. Then there's Kyle Broflovsky, the show's moral compass. He was the voice of reason, constantly battling with Cartman's insanity. Kyle was the one who learned the episode's lesson, delivering those signature, you know, I learned something today speeches. And then there's Eric Cartman. He wasn't just the fat kid, he was a budding sociopath, a manipulative, racist, greedy monster who somehow remained utterly hilarious. He was the engine of chaos that drove almost every early plot. And finally, Kenny McCormick, the muffled, immortal punching bag. He was less of a character and more of a plot device, a walking, talking, perpetually dying punchline that became the show's first iconic calling card. That catchphrase, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," wasn't just a gag. It was a statement. In a world where cartoon characters never died, South Park made death a routine, almost boring event. It was brilliant. The point was to desensitize you. After seeing Kenny get eaten by rats, microwaved, or impaled on a flagpole, you stopped feeling shock. It was a meta-commentary on cartoon violence itself, making you laugh at the absurdity of it all. And the best part? He always came back the next episode with zero explanation. This cycle of death and rebirth turned a throwaway joke into a legend. Everyone tuned in just to see how Kenny would buy it this week. But the boys weren't alone. The town of South Park was its own character, populated by the most dysfunctional adults imaginable. These weren't the wise, loving parents from other cartoons. They were idiots. You had their teacher, Mr. Garrison, a deeply disturbed man who talked through a hand puppet named Mr. Hat. He taught them nothing of value and was often the source of the town's biggest problems. He was the definition of unfit. The only adult with a shred of sense was Chef. He was the school cook who'd break into soulful songs about making love. He was the kid's only real confidant, which, when you think about it, is completely insane. And the parents? From Stan's dad Randy being a geologist obsessed with being cool, to Kyle's mom Sheila leading moral crusades, they were never helpful. The kids were always left to solve apocalyptic problems on their own. This entire ecosystem was fueled by one thing: juvenile humor. We're talking farts, poop, and vomit. The first few seasons leaned hard into being as gross and offensive as possible for a reason. Remember the episode with Cartman's evil goldfish? A goldfish. It was a parody of horror tropes, but also just an excuse for absurd violence. This was the show finding its voice by being as dumb as it could possibly be. They had an episode about a volcano where the big solution was digging a trench to divert lava. It was a send-up of disaster movies, but the real star was Scuzzlebutt, a monster with Patrick Duffy for a leg. It was pure nonsense. Every week, Matt and Trey were testing their limits. How far could they push Comedy Central before the network censors snapped? They were like kids seeing what swear words they could get away with, but on a national stage. And then, they almost pushed it too far. The first season was a hit, and the network wanted a Christmas special. So Trey and Matt pitched an episode about a singing piece of Christmas poo. The network freaked. They told Matt and Trey they could not put a talking turd on television, especially not for Christmas. They begged them to change it, to make them a piece of Christmas gingerbread or anything else. But Matt and Trey refused. They basically said, it's Mr. Hanky or we quit. They were willing to let their hit show die on the hill of a magical singing piece of crap. It was an insane gamble. And the network blinked. They let them make the episode. Mr. Hanky, the Christmas poo, became one of the most iconic episodes of the entire series. It proved the creators would never compromise their vision, no matter how stupid. That's what made early South Park a phenomenon. It wasn't just funny, it was dangerous. You watched because you couldn't believe what you were seeing. It was forbidden fruit for an entire generation of kids. Parents hated it. Schools banned the t-shirts. It was on the cover of every magazine. The crude animation and shocking humor weren't a bug. They were the entire feature. It was punk rock in cartoon form. But underneath all the farts and killing Kenny, something else was brewing. The show was getting smarter, faster, and more ambitious. The shock value was the hook, but it wasn't the end game. They had bigger plans. The show was a certified mega hit, but a question remained. Could this 22-minute shockfest work on the big screen? They decided to find out by making something nobody expected, a full-blown musical movie. With the show a certified phenomenon, the next step seemed obvious, a movie. But Paramount and Comedy Central were terrified. They believed a feature film would be overkill, burning out the audience and killing their golden goose before it had even fully hatched. Their fear was that you couldn't stretch a 22-minute shockfest into a 90-minute story. The formula of crude animation and pop culture riffs seemed destined to collapse under the weight of a feature film. It was a huge gamble. But Trey Parker and Matt Stone saw it differently. They didn't want to just make a longer episode. They wanted to go bigger. They wanted to do something no one saw coming. They decided to make a full-blown Broadway-style musical. This wasn't a joke. Trey Parker genuinely loves musicals. He saw it as the perfect vehicle to elevate the storytelling and go beyond simple shock value. The songs could carry the emotional weight and the satirical commentary in a way dialogue alone couldn't. They specifically modeled the structure on the Disney Renaissance films they grew up with. You have the I Want song, the villain's triumphant anthem, the big ensemble numbers, but all filtered through South Park's incredibly vulgar lens. It was a genius move. And the plot? The plot was the most brilliant part. The entire movie is a meta commentary on itself. The kids see a profane Canadian movie, their parents get outraged, and it leads to a war. This was exactly what was happening in the real world with South Park. They took every criticism, every panicked news report, every pearl-clutching parent group's complaint, and wrote it directly into the script. The movie wasn't just about the boys, it was about the moral panic the show itself had created. The film's central argument is devastatingly simple. Don't blame the media, blame the parents. It's a full-throated defense of free speech and a direct attack on censorship, using the US war with Canada as a hilariously absurd metaphor. And the songs were key. Uncle Fucka is the inciting incident, the piece of forbidden media that starts the entire conflict. It's not just a dirty song for shock value, it's the narrative's catalyst. It's what the entire war is fought over. Then you have Kyle's Mom's a Bitch, an orchestral reprise of a simple song from season 1. In the movie, it becomes Cartman's resistance anthem, a full-blown Les Miserables style number. It transforms a dumb joke into something epic. Even Satan gets a heartfelt Disney-style ballad about his abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein. It's absurd, it's touching, and it gives the film an unexpected emotional core. You actually feel bad for the Prince of Darkness. But the centerpiece, the song that encapsulated the entire film's thesis, was Blame Canada. It's the perfect satire of scapegoating. It's catchy, it's hilarious, and it became a genuine cultural touchstone overnight. The movie was so controversial that the MPAA initially gave it an NC-17 rating, which would have been a commercial kiss of death. They fought back and forth for weeks, ultimately getting the R rating they needed, but the battle itself proved the movie's point. The film was released in the summer of 1999, and it was a monster hit. It grossed over $83 million on a $21 million budget. The network's fears were completely unfounded. The audience didn't just show up, they were starving for it. Critical reception was shockingly positive. Critics who had dismissed the show praised the film's intelligence and wit. But then, something truly impossible happened. Something that changed the narrative forever. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut was nominated for an Academy Award. Blame Canada was nominated for Best Original Song. Let that sink in. The song with the word fart in it was up for an Oscar. It was going up against songs by Phil Collins for Tarzan and Randy Newman for Toy Story 2. This was the ultimate culture clash. The stuffy, self-important Academy versus the most juvenile, offensive cartoon on the planet. The media went insane. This wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a legitimate piece of art being recognized by the highest authority in Hollywood. Everyone wondered the same thing. What are they going to do at the Oscars? Trey and Matt knew they had to make a statement. They couldn't just show up in tuxedos. So they did the most South Park thing imaginable. They showed up in dresses, tripping on acid. They wore replicas of iconic dresses worn by Jennifer Lopez and Gwyneth Paltrow from previous awards shows. The press was baffled. It was a masterclass in trolling, a perfect middle finger to Hollywood's self-seriousness. But the performance was the real chaos. Since the network censors wouldn't let them sing the song as written, they got Robin Williams to perform it. He came out with a chorus of dancers leading a campy, over-the-top version of the song. They ended up losing the Oscar to Phil Collins. The cameras cut to Trey and Matt's faces, and they looked completely unfazed, because they had already won. The nomination and the performance were the victory. Losing didn't matter. They had crashed the party, made their point, and gotten more publicity than an Oscar win ever could have. They proved that their brand of satire belonged in the mainstream conversation. The combination of massive box office success, critical acclaim, and that Oscar nomination gave Trey and Matt the ultimate leverage. They went back to Comedy Central not as employees, but as conquering heroes. They essentially got a blank check. The network realized that the less they interfered, the more successful the show became. The movie proved that Trey and Matt's wildest, most controversial ideas were also their most popular. This was the moment South Park became truly untouchable. No more network notes about being too offensive. No more battles over censorship. They had earned the right to do whatever they wanted, however they wanted. The movie wasn't the end of an era, it was the beginning of a new one. It washed the slate clean and gave them the confidence and the freedom to push the show into even stranger, more ambitious territory. Looking back, the movie is the single most important turning point in the show's history. It elevated them from a fad into a permanent institution. It's the reason the show is still on the air today. But with this newfound freedom came a new challenge. How could they keep the show relevant and sharp? How could they top themselves season after season? They needed to change their entire process. They had the creative freedom, but to truly become the satirical powerhouse we know today, they had to solve the problem of time. And their solution would become one of the most legendary production schedules in television history. After the movie, Matt and Trey had ultimate creative freedom. They could have done anything. Instead of taking a break, they used that power to make their lives infinitely harder, inventing a production schedule that no other show on Earth would dare to attempt. They completely abandoned traditional animation timelines. Most animated shows take months, sometimes a year, to produce a single episode. South Park decided to do it in under a week. This wasn't an experiment. It became the new normal, the engine that would drive the show's golden age. The goal was simple and insane: to be as topical as a late-night talk show, but as an animated sitcom. They wanted to talk about what you were talking about right now, not 6 months from now. This decision fundamentally changed what South Park was even about. So here's how the miracle happens. The clock starts on Thursday. Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and a small team of writers gather in a room with a blank board. They have absolutely no idea what the next episode will be about. The pressure is on from the very first minute. By Friday morning, Trey has locked himself away to write the entire script. As pages are finished, they're rushed to the voice actors. The audio is recorded while the script is still being written. There is no room for error. Every second is critical. The weekend is an animator's nightmare. A massive team takes the script and audio and begins a frantic, round-the-clock sprint to animate 22 minutes of television. Storyboards, character models, backgrounds, it all has to be created from scratch in about 48 hours. Monday and Tuesday are for rendering and last-minute additions. Trey can, and often does, decide to rewrite jokes or add entire scenes based on news that broke over the weekend. The animators just have to deal with it. It's a chaotic, fluid process until the final moment. The episode is finished on Wednesday afternoon, just hours before it airs. A courier literally runs the master tape to the satellite uplink station. There is no backup. If they miss that deadline, Comedy Central airs a rerun. That's the whole insane gamble. And why go through all this hell? Because it allowed them to do things no other show could. When Saddam Hussein was captured on a Saturday, they put him in the Christmas special that Wednesday. This wasn't just fast, it was real-time cultural commentary. This became their signature move. The Elian Gonzalez raid, the Terry Schiavo debate, the capture of Osama bin Laden, they tackled these events the very same week they dominated the news cycle. The show felt more relevant than the news itself. Suddenly, South Park wasn't just making fun of celebrities, it was processing national trauma and absurdity in real time. It was the only place on television where you could see the week's biggest, most confusing story broken down and ridiculed instantly. This speed even allowed them to respond to their own controversies. When they were criticized for one episode, they would build the next episode around that criticism. They were in a constant high-speed dialogue with their audience and their critics. This is what forever separated them from a show like The Simpsons. The Simpsons, for all its genius, operated on a 9-month production schedule. By the time their jokes about current events aired, the cultural moment was long gone. They were writing history. South Park was writing the present. They weren't just reacting to the culture, they were shaping the conversation as it happened. This immediacy made The Simpsons feel like a relic of a bygone era, while South Park felt dangerously alive and relevant. They effectively broke the animation model. After South Park, every other adult animated show that tried to be topical seemed painfully slow. They weren't just winning the race, they had built a racetrack no one else could even get on. This high-pressure environment didn't just create topical episodes, it forged some of the greatest episodes in television history. Scott Tenorman Must Die is the perfect example. It's a masterclass in comedic escalation that ends in one of the darkest punchlines ever aired. This episode was the true turning point for Cartman's character. He went from being a spoiled brat to a full-blown Machiavellian sociopath. And the show went from being shocking to being genuinely subversive. Nothing was off the table after this. Then you have Make Love Not Warcraft, an episode so epic it required collaboration with Blizzard Entertainment themselves. It perfectly captured the obsession and absurdity of online gaming culture at its absolute peak. It was a love letter and a takedown all at once. And don't forget The Losing Edge, a pitch-perfect parody of underdog sports movies. The twist? The boys are desperately trying to lose the baseball season so they can just play video games. It's one of the most brilliantly constructed, hilarious episodes they've ever done. These episodes, all born from this chaotic pressure cooker, represent the show's undisputed golden age. The writing was sharper, the satire was smarter, and the stories were more ambitious than ever before. They were simply untouchable for a solid decade. But this genius came at a staggering personal cost. The documentary 6 Days to Air is not a celebration. It's a horror movie about a deadline. It shows Matt and Trey pushed to their absolute physical and mental limits year after year. We're talking sleepless nights, creative dead ends hit at 3 a.m., and the constant crushing fear of not having an idea, of not being funny enough, of finally missing that Wednesday deadline. It was a recipe for total and complete burnout. In interviews, they've called the schedule a prison of their own making. They hated it. But they also knew it was the source of the show's magic. The lack of time to second-guess anything forced them to trust their rawest, most unfiltered comedic instincts. So why keep doing it? Because it worked. The quality of the show during this period is a direct result of this insane process. The pressure squeezed out every drop of creative juice they had, leaving nothing on the table week after week. And this process is the true secret to South Park's longevity. It's not just the crude humor or the cute characters. It's the fact that the show has remained relentlessly, aggressively present for over 2 decades. It never feels old. The 6-day schedule is a self-correcting system. If they have a bad episode, it doesn't matter. They get a completely fresh start 7 days later. There's no time to dwell on failure, only time to create the next thing. It's creative survival. This is a huge part of why the show can never be canceled. It's not just a TV show, it's a utility. It's the cultural first responder for every major event. To cancel South Park would be to lose our most immediate and honest comedic mirror. Over time, the show transformed. It stopped being just a shock comedy cartoon and became a real-time cultural diary. You can watch the entire series and see a week-by-week history of American absurdity for the last 25 years. No other work of fiction has achieved that. This bulletproof process gave them the ultimate confidence. The knowledge that they could produce an episode about anything in 6 days meant they were afraid of nothing. No topic was too sacred, no celebrity too powerful, and no organization too litigious to take on. And they were about to need every ounce of that confidence, because they were about to use their lightning-fast production schedule to pick a fight with one of the most famously aggressive and powerful organizations on the planet, starting the biggest war of their careers. That lightning-fast production schedule wasn't just for jokes about current events. It allowed Trey and Matt to build and deploy satirical bombs with pinpoint accuracy. And in 2005, they targeted their biggest subject yet, the Church of Scientology. The episode starts simply enough. Stan is looking for something to do, and he stumbles upon a free personality test offered by the Scientologists. What he doesn't know is that this test is about to change his life and the show forever. Stan's test results are so average, they're off the charts. The church leaders are stunned. They declare that he isn't just another recruit. He's the actual reincarnation of their founder, L. Ron Hubbard. Word spreads fast. Suddenly, Scientologist celebrities from all over are flocking to South Park to meet their new leader. And the first one at the door is their most famous member, Tom Cruise. Stan, being a kid, thinks Cruise's acting is just okay. This sends Cruise into a spiral of insecurity, and he locks himself inside Stan's closet, refusing to come out. This is where the episode's central and most vicious joke begins. The show then spends the next several minutes with characters literally begging Tom Cruise to come out of the closet. It was a direct, unsubtle, and deeply personal shot at years of tabloid rumors. But the celebrity mockery was just the appetizer. The main course was a full-blown attack on Scientology's core beliefs. The church president sits Stan down to tell him the secret creation story of the universe. What follows is a detailed on-screen depiction of the story of Xenu, the Galactic Confederacy, and frozen souls being dropped into volcanoes. And the whole time, a caption is plastered on the screen, This is what Scientologists actually believe. This wasn't just satire anymore. This was a reveal. They took a core, confidential doctrine that members spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to learn and put it on basic cable for free. It was an act of aggressive, comedic journalism. The reaction was immediate. The episode exploded online. Fans couldn't believe how far they'd gone, and Scientology, an organization famous for its aggressive legal tactics, was suddenly in the crosshairs of the world's most dangerous cartoon. But the biggest fallout came from inside the show. Isaac Hayes, the legendary soul singer and beloved voice of Chef, publicly announced he was quitting. The moral center of South Park was gone. His official statement, released through his publicist, cited the show's intolerance and bigotry towards religion. He said they had crossed the line from satire into outright hatred. For fans, it was a shocking betrayal. Trey Parker and Matt Stone fired back immediately. They released their own statement pointing out the devastating hypocrisy. Isaac Hayes, a Scientologist, had no problem when they mocked Christians, Jews, or Muslims. Their point was simple. It's easy to stand for religious tolerance until it's your religion being made fun of. They essentially called him a hypocrite who was fine with mocking everyone else's beliefs but his own. But the story gets even darker. Friends of Hayes came forward alleging that he, having suffered a stroke, was in no condition to quit. They claimed his Scientologist handlers quit for him, under immense pressure from the church. So now Trey and Matt had a choice. Their friend and colleague was gone, possibly against his will. They could recast the voice, retire the character quietly, or they could make a statement. They chose to make a statement. The season 10 premiere was titled The Return of Chef, and it was one of the most brutal episodes they ever produced. They were out for blood. Using cleverly edited clips of his old dialogue, they portrayed Chef as having been brainwashed by a cult called the Super Adventure Club, a clear stand-in for Scientology. He returns to South Park a completely different person. The boys try to save him, but it's too late. The episode ends with Chef falling off a bridge, being impaled, mauled by a mountain lion and a grizzly bear, and then set on fire. It was horrific. The message was unmistakable. If you betray the show, you will be destroyed. Not just written off, but viciously dismantled on screen. No one, not even a beloved character, was untouchable. But the on-screen war was just one part of it. Behind the scenes, a corporate battle was brewing. Comedy Central's parent company, Viacom, suddenly pulled the scheduled rerun of Trapped in the Closet. The rumor, which has never been officially confirmed but is widely believed, was that Tom Cruise threatened to back out of all promotional duties for his upcoming blockbuster, Mission Impossible 3, unless Viacom buried the episode. Instead of backing down, South Park issued a press release. They sarcastically thanked Tom Cruise and Scientology, saying, "The fight is not with us, but with you." They declared victory, framing the censorship as proof of Scientology's power. The episode was eventually rebroadcast in the US, but the controversy had legs. In the United Kingdom, the episode was repeatedly pulled from the air for years, with the channel citing fear of legal action from the church. This entire saga marked a fundamental shift for South Park. They went from mocking silly celebrities to directly attacking powerful, wealthy, and famously litigious institutions. This was a whole new level of satire. It cemented their reputation as completely and utterly fearless. They proved they wouldn't be intimidated by movie stars, corporate parents, or the threat of endless lawsuits. They answered to no one. Before this, you might have thought some topics were too dangerous to touch. After Trapped in the Closet, the message was clear. No person, no belief, and no organization was safe from their commentary. They had stared down one of the most powerful organizations in Hollywood and won. This set a dangerous precedent, both for their enemies and for themselves. They now believed they could take on anyone. This victory emboldened them, pushing them to celebrate their own history of controversy in a massive two-part special. They thought they were bulletproof, ready to take on their biggest target yet, every single person they had ever offended. But taking on a secretive church was one thing. They were about to learn that some targets fight back in ways they could never anticipate, leading to the one time that Trey Parker and Matt Stone would truly and definitively lose. After declaring war on Scientology and winning, Trey Parker and Matt Stone seemed absolutely untouchable. They had proven that no topic was too sacred, no celebrity too powerful to be taken down. So what do you do next? You throw a party. For their 200th episode, the plan was a massive self-celebration, a victory lap of their own infamous history. The premise was simple. Every celebrity they'd ever mocked was suing the town of South Park. This brought everyone back into the fold. We're talking Mecha Streisand, Tom Cruise hiding in the closet again, Jennifer Lopez. It was a who's who of South Park's greatest hits. It was meant to be the ultimate fan service episode, but the central plot involved one figure who could unite all these angry celebrities, the Prophet Muhammad. Tom Cruise and the others believe Muhammad possesses a magical, mock-proof goo that they desperately want. Now, this wasn't the first time they depicted Muhammad, not even close. You'll remember all the way back in Season 5's Super Best Friends, Muhammad was a recurring character, a literal superhero alongside Jesus and Buddha. And back then, absolutely nothing happened. No protests, no threats, no angry network calls. It aired without a single issue. They had already done it, which is why they thought they could do it again. They'd even fought this exact battle before in Cartoon Wars, where they argued for Family Guy's right to show Muhammad. They won that fight, forcing the network to let them make their point. This time felt like a foregone conclusion, but the world had changed. After episode 200 aired, a radical group called Revolution Muslim posted a message online. It wasn't just a complaint, it was a thinly veiled death threat directed at Trey and Matt. The post included photos of Theo van Gogh, a Dutch filmmaker who was murdered for his work critical of Islam. It included the addresses of Comedy Central's offices. The message was crystal clear: stop or you'll end up like him. This was not angry letters from Scientologists or a sternly worded press release. This was a credible threat of violence. It fundamentally changed the stakes from an argument about comedy to a matter of life and death. And here's the kicker. Episode 201, the conclusion of the two-parter, was already finished. The show's brutal production schedule meant they had no time to rewrite it. They had to either air it as is or pull it entirely. And that's when Comedy Central completely panicked. The threats worked exactly as intended. The network executives were terrified of the potential consequences of being the network that got two creators killed. Trey and Matt were ready to fight, just like they did during Cartoon Wars. But this time, the network wasn't listening. The decision was taken out of their hands. The network was going to handle it, whether they liked it or not. In the dead of night before the episode aired, Comedy Central's Standards and Practices Department went to work. They started by bleeping every single mention of Muhammad's name. But they didn't stop there. They also decided to place a giant black box over the character of Muhammad for the entire episode. This was despite the fact that the episode's climax reveals it isn't even Muhammad in the bear costume. It's Santa Claus. This was all done without Trey and Matt's final approval. The network fundamentally altered their work, their art, out of fear. They completely sidelined the creators on their own show. When episode 201 finally aired, it was a mutilated mess. Long stretches of audio were just a series of bleeps. Key visual gags were completely obscured. It was, in many places, literally unwatchable. But the most damning moment, the part that became legendary, was the episode's final speech. Kyle steps forward to deliver a classic South Park moral, a heartfelt monologue about the episode's true meaning. The speech is about the power of words and the danger of using violence and intimidation to silence people. He argues that you can't fight speech with fear because that gives it power. It's the show's core thesis. And what did the network do to this beautiful speech about not giving in to threats? They censored the entire thing. Almost every word Kyle says is covered by a long, painful bleep. It is the most perfectly ironic act of censorship in television history. By censoring the speech, Comedy Central proved its entire point. They gave in to intimidation, and in doing so, made the episode's message 1,000,000 times more powerful. After the episode aired, Trey and Matt released a statement. It wasn't angry, it was just disappointed. They explained what the final speech was supposed to be about and confirmed the network had inserted the bleeps. They wrote, "In the 14 years we've been doing South Park, we have never done a show that we couldn't stand behind." The implication was clear. They could not stand behind this butchered version. They had lost. This was it. The one time the network didn't have their backs. The one time the controversy was too real. For a show built on saying anything, this was a devastating blow. The terrorists had won, and the consequences were permanent. To this day, episodes 200 and 201 are almost impossible to watch legally. They are not on Max. You cannot buy them on digital storefronts. They have been effectively erased. The uncensored version was never aired or released. It exists only at South Park Studios, a piece of lost media that serves as a grim reminder of the one-time free speech actually failed on South Park. For years, the central question of the show was, where is the line? With 200 and 201, they finally found it. The line wasn't taste or decency, it was a credible threat of real-world violence. This event marked the end of an era for the show. The sense of absolute invincibility was gone. They had faced a foe they couldn't defeat with satire and had been betrayed by their own network. When you lose a fight that big, you can't just go back to business as usual. The show had pushed the boundaries of episodic controversy as far as they could possibly go. Something had to change. Having been defeated in the arena of weekly controversy, South Park had to find a new way to push boundaries. It couldn't just get more shocking, so it got more ambitious, setting the stage for its biggest creative gamble ever. After the absolute war zone that was episodes 200 and 201, Trey and Matt were at a crossroads. They had fought the network and, for the first time, truly lost. The show needed a new battle to fight. For nearly 2 decades, the formula was perfect. A new topic, a new adventure, reset by next week. But that formula was becoming a creative trap, and the satire was in danger of becoming predictable. They had done it all. They'd tackled every celebrity, every political issue, every fad. The question became, how do you stay relevant when you're older than most of your audience? Their answer? Burn the formula to the ground. They decided to do the one thing South Park was never supposed to do: tell one single continuous story for an entire season. The first shot fired in this new war was the arrival of PC Principal, a character specifically designed to embody and mock the hypersensitive, politically correct culture that was exploding online. He wasn't just a one-off gag. He represented a fundamental shift. The show was no longer just making fun of external events. It was turning the lens inward, forcing the town to confront its own legacy. He wasn't a villain you could defeat in 22 minutes. He was a new system, a new reality. He was here to stay, and he immediately started changing the DNA of the entire show. Season 19 became the first real test. PC Principal's arrival was connected to the town's gentrification, Whole Foods, and online ads. For the first time, every episode built on the last. And you know what? It worked. The season felt cohesive, ambitious, and most importantly, fresh. It felt like South Park had a new sense of purpose. But this was just the warm-up act. Because in season 20, they went completely off the rails. They decided to build an entire season around the 2016 presidential election, and they did it with a talking bunch of grapes. The member berries were genius. They represented toxic nostalgia, the dangerous desire to return to a simpler past that never really existed. They cooed about Star Wars while a darker reality was taking shape. This was their metaphor for the rise of Donald Trump. Mr. Garrison's transformation into a Trump-like figure wasn't a one-off joke. It was the central plot of the entire season, fueled by the public's desire for the past. The show was being written week to week, reacting to the actual election news. They were building a serialized narrative while the real-world events they were satirizing were still unfolding. It was an insane tightrope walk. They were so sure Hillary Clinton would win that they titled their election night episode, "The Very First Gentleman." When Trump won, they had to rewrite the entire thing in less than 24 hours. And underneath it all was the Skank Hunt 42 plot, revealing Gerald Broflovsky as a vicious internet troll. This wasn't just a side story. It was a core theme about the anonymity and cruelty of online life. Every single episode in season 20 ended on a cliffhanger. Who is the troll? Will Garrison win? What are the member berries planning? This was South Park trying to be Breaking Bad, and it was wild. This entire experiment, this grand serialization, was perhaps the most divisive move they ever made. Because for every fan who loved the new depth, another fan absolutely despised it. The critics had a point. The episodes weren't as rewatchable on their own. The relentless focus on plot sometimes came at the expense of the jokes. It didn't always feel like classic South Park. Longtime viewers missed the standalone chaos. They missed being able to tune in any week and get a complete razor-sharp satire of one specific thing, without needing to remember last week's plot. Sometimes the show got so tangled in its own web of storylines, the trolls, the election, the berries, that the central message got lost. The commentary felt less focused, more spread out. But the defenders of this era saw something else entirely. They saw a show that was growing up. It was tackling complex, multifaceted issues that couldn't be solved in a single episode. For these fans, the serialization added a new layer of character development and thematic depth. It allowed for longer, more nuanced explorations of ideas like nostalgia, identity, and online behavior. Regardless of which side you were on, one thing was clear. This was a massive gamble. Trey and Matt risked alienating their core audience to prove that South Park could still evolve. They refused to become a member berry of themselves. They could have coasted for another decade on the classic formula, becoming a comfortable relic of the 90s. But they chose to be dangerous. After a few seasons, they did eventually pull back from the heavy serialization. They even made fun of themselves for it, with Cartman complaining that member berries are what ruined this country. But the experiment changed the show forever. It proved they weren't afraid to tear down their own creation and rebuild it from scratch. It showed they were still hungry, still willing to fail. This era proved that South Park was arguably the most adaptable show in television history. It completely altered its own structure to meet the chaotic, serialized nature of modern politics and culture. The serialization era was a creative rebirth. It might have been messy, and it might have been divisive, but it was necessary. It injected new life into a show that could have easily faded away. By proving they could still innovate and command the cultural conversation after 20 years, they weren't just making a TV show anymore. They were building an incredibly valuable piece of intellectual property. And that fearless evolution, that willingness to risk it all to stay relevant, is exactly what made every major company on the planet want a piece of them when the streaming wars truly began. Just when they'd mastered serialized storytelling, the entire world shut down. The COVID-19 pandemic didn't just pause television, it completely broke South Park's legendary 6-day production schedule. That frantic collaborative energy in a single room? It was suddenly impossible. For the first time in over 2 decades, the South Park machine ground to a halt. No one knew what would happen next. While other shows went on indefinite hiatus or produced awkward Zoom episodes, Trey and Matt saw an opportunity. They couldn't make a normal season, so they decided to do something completely different. Their answer? Instead of 22-minute episodes, they would create massive hour-long specials. These wouldn't just be episodes about the pandemic, they would become cultural events that defined it. The pandemic special dropped like a bomb. It was the first piece of major scripted entertainment to perfectly capture the paranoia, the absurdity, and the sheer stupidity of lockdown life. From mask debates to online school to Randy's, special role in the outbreak, it was exactly what we all needed. It wasn't just funny, it was cathartic. South Park was back. They followed it up with the South Park vaccination special, tackling the next phase of the crisis with vicious accuracy. The fight for vaccine access became a battle between Walgreens and CVS. It was genius. These specials weren't just a stopgap, they were a declaration. In a time of global uncertainty, South Park was more essential and more relevant than ever before. And the industry noticed. Meanwhile, the entertainment world was tearing itself apart. The streaming wars were in full swing, with every company launching their own service and desperately searching for killer content. So what did South Park do? They made their next specials a direct, scathing meta-commentary on the streaming wars themselves. It was one of their most brilliant moves ever. The central joke was that everyone in South Park had their own streaming service, creating endless content nobody wanted. The parody was barely distinguishable from the reality of the entertainment business. Here's the best part. They used their own messy rights deal, with some content on HBO Max and other content on Paramount Plus, as a central plot point. They turned a corporate headache into comedy gold. This proved they weren't just participating in the streaming wars, they were mastering them. They understood the game better than the executives playing it, and they were about to cash in. With the specials being massive hits and their commentary being sharper than ever, Viacom CBS, the parent company of Paramount Plus, knew they had to lock them down. They couldn't afford to lose their crown jewel. And then, the news broke. Trey Parker and Matt Stone signed a new deal with Viacom CBS. The price tag? $900 million. Let's be clear, this is one of the richest and most insane deals in television history. We're talking about money that completely reshapes the landscape of an entire media company. So what did that $900 million buy? It renewed the show on Comedy Central through its 30th season in 2027. And that was just the start. The deal also funded 14 original made-for-streaming movies and specials, all exclusive to Paramount Plus. This wasn't just renewing a show, this was building an entire South Park cinematic universe. Viacom CBS made a gigantic bet. They bet that in a fractured media world, having one of the few guaranteed cultural phenomenons was worth almost $1 billion. And they were absolutely right. This wasn't luck. This was the culmination of over 2 decades of relentlessly staying ahead of the curve. They earned this deal by never getting comfortable and always speaking truth to power. So in the end, Matt and Trey didn't just survive the streaming wars. They conquered them. They used the industry's own chaos and desperation to secure their independence and future for another decade. They turned a world-stopping pandemic and a period of industry-wide panic into the single greatest financial victory of their careers. It's the most South Park thing that could possibly happen. They took a confusing, fractured distribution strategy and leveraged it into a gold mine. It proved that content is still king, and South Park is the undisputed ruler of its own kingdom. This monumental deal didn't just guarantee more South Park, it cemented its status as an institution. But a deal this big is only possible because of the undeniable mark the show had already left on the world. That $900 million deal we just talked about? That isn't just a paycheck for the future. It's the ultimate validation of a legacy that has fundamentally and permanently changed television. Because let's be clear, South Park didn't invent adult animation. The Simpsons had already laid the groundwork, and Beavis and Butthead proved there was an audience for something edgier. But those shows walked so that South Park could sprint. Matt and Trey took the baton and launched it into the stratosphere, making sophisticated, truly adult animation mainstream. Before South Park, an adult cartoon meant a few dirty jokes the kids wouldn't get. After South Park, it meant absolutely anything was on the table, no matter how profoundly controversial. And this is where the show discovered its true power. It proved that simple, crude animation could be the single sharpest tool for political and social commentary on television. Period. Their 6-day production schedule wasn't just a gimmick, it was a game changer. They could satirize news stories while they were still breaking news, something no other scripted show could do. This wasn't just topical humor. It was a complete revolution in how television could engage with the real world, reacting in real time with unparalleled comedic precision. They tackled 9/11, presidential elections, global pandemics, and every culture war imaginable with a fearlessness that was absolutely unprecedented. Nothing was off limits. Ever. You can draw a straight, undeniable line from South Park's success to an entire generation of animated hits that followed. It's the genre's ground zero. Without the pure, unfiltered id of Eric Cartman breaking every moral boundary, do you really think we would have gotten the brilliant, cynical nihilism of Rick Sanchez? I doubt it. Would a show like Family Guy, with its non-sequitur cutaway gags and boundary-pushing humor, have ever been greenlit in a world where South Park hadn't already demolished the rulebook? And modern masterpieces like Big Mouth or BoJack Horseman, which explore deep, mature themes through animation. They owe their entire existence to the door South Park kicked wide open. Trey and Matt proved there was a massive, hungry, and intelligent audience for animation that treated adults like, well, adults, not overgrown children. And Hollywood listened. Now let's talk about that TVMA rating. South Park didn't just earn it on occasion. For over 2 decades, they have completely owned and redefined what that rating even means. The show became a constant battleground for censorship, with Matt and Trey always pushing the line and Comedy Central trying to figure out where that line even was anymore. You'll remember the international controversy over depicting the Prophet Muhammad. That wasn't just a ratings stunt, it was a defining moment for the concept of free speech on television. They forced networks, critics, and audiences to ask a crucial question. What is truly offensive? Is it a swear word and a fart joke? Or is it a dangerous, unchallenged idea? The show's influence became so profound, it even spilled over into real-world politics. For years, the term South Park Republican was a legitimate demographic studied by pollsters. It described a growing generation of younger viewers who were fiscally conservative but socially liberal, a complex viewpoint the show often accidentally embodied. This wasn't about endorsing one party over another. It was about promoting a kind of radical common-sense libertarianism. Just leave people alone to make their own choices. They taught millions of people to be deeply skeptical of both sides of the political aisle, to question dogma wherever it came from. A lesson that is more vital today than ever before. For anyone who grew up in the late 90s and 2000s, South Park wasn't just another TV show. It was a fundamental piece of your cultural education. It shaped your whole worldview. It was the first show to look you dead in the eye and tell you that everything could be a joke. Nothing was too sacred, too serious, or too terrifying to be laughed at. And that was powerful. It was a defense mechanism. It gave an entire generation a toolkit for questioning authority, deconstructing media, and finding humor in the darkest of times. Think about it. Respect my authorita, blame Canada, they took our jobs. These weren't just catchphrases, they became a shared cultural language for millions of people. But when you boil it all down, after all the controversy and all the influence, what is South Park's single greatest legacy? It's one concept: the refusal to compromise. In an industry built on notes from executives, meddling from advertisers, and sanding down every sharp edge, Matt and Trey built an empire on one principle: their vision, completely unfiltered. They have never apologized for a joke. They have never backed down from a controversy. They have never once catered to anyone but themselves and what they thought was funny. This absolute stubborn refusal to bend is what makes the show feel eternal. It isn't just a product of its time, it's a timeless monument to pure, unadulterated creative freedom. That unwavering vision is what got them here, from a construction paper short to a billion-dollar franchise. It's the ultimate foundation. And it leaves us with one final massive question. So what is next for South Park? It's insane to remember this all started with two guys, some construction paper, and a VHS tape that went viral before that was even a word. They had no idea they were about to create an empire. From there, it became a global phenomenon. It wasn't just a cartoon, it was a cultural reset. Every week was an event, a new controversy, a new catchphrase that everyone would be repeating the next day at school. But the real genius of South Park is its ability to constantly reinvent itself. Most shows find a formula and stick to it until they run out of gas. South Park blows up its own formula every few years, on purpose. It evolved from pure shock value into the sharpest, fastest satire on the planet. They went from fart jokes to deconstructing global politics in real time. No other show has ever managed that kind of pivot successfully. Which brings us to the ultimate truth. South Park is no longer just a TV show. It's a permanent, unshakable part of our cultural landscape. It has survived everything, and at this point, it's basically indestructible. With their massive Paramount Plus deal extending through 2027, their future is locked in. More seasons, more specials, more of whatever the hell they can possibly think of next. The story is far from over. Ultimately, the show has become a funhouse mirror, reflecting our own absurd world back at us. It's not just Matt and Trey's story anymore, it's ours. And as long as the world keeps getting weirder, South Park will always have something to say. But what do you think is the show's greatest moment? What other cartoon sagas should we unpack next? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more Toon recaps. Thanks for watching! South Park is a miracle of television that will probably outlive us all. If you want more deep dives into the shows that defined animation, hit that subscribe button. And check out our full recap of The Simpsons right here.